"You're not academic enough," he chuckled, sliding my research proposal across his mahogany desk like it was contaminated. But before this incident, let me paint you a picture of corporate hierarchy at Advanced Tech. Picture a gleaming research facility, where PhDs wear lab coats like armor and publications are currency. The building itself was a monument to scientific ego, 12 floors of glass and steel. With the executive offices perched on top like a crown, I'm Diana Ramzan, senior research scientist, 5 years deep in materials engineering. And apparently, according to my director, insufficiently academic. My lab was on the 7th floor, wedged between the computational chemistry department and the break room that perpetually smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. It wasn't much to look at: standard issue lab benches, a temperamental spectrometer that I'd nicknamed Bertha, and a ventilation system that wheezed like a chain smoker. But it was mine. And in those sterile walls, I'd been quietly revolutionizing polymer synthesis while my colleagues argued about conference presentations and citation counts. Dr. Harrison Blake embodied everything wrong with academic elitism. Harvard PhD, perfectly coiffed silver hair, and the kind of condescending smile that made you want to check your shoes for dog shit. He'd been riding the coattails of research he'd done 20 years ago, back when polyethylene was still considered cutting edge. His office was a shrine to past glorious framed diplomas, awards from the 1990s, and photographs of him shaking hands with Nobel laureates who probably didn't remember his name. The man had a ritual. Every morning at 9:15 a.m., he'd make his rounds through the labs, coffee mug in hand, dispensing wisdom like a benevolent dictator. He'd peer over his shoulders, nod thoughtfully at work he didn't understand, and make comments designed to remind everyone that he was still the smartest person in the room. Interesting approach. "Diana," he'd say, watching me calibrate equipment, "very ... practical. Practical. The academic equivalent of calling someone's cooking edible." The grant proposal in question, a $2.3 million NSF award for developing next-generation biodegradable plastics, 3 months of my life distilled into 47 pages of pure innovation. I'd discovered a method to enhance molecular bonding using a novel catalyst system that could reduce decomposition time by 80%. Revolutionary stuff. World-changing stuff. The kind of breakthrough that keeps you awake at night. Not because you're stressed, but because you're too excited to sleep. I'd started the research 18 months earlier, sparked by a conversation with my neighbor's 8-year-old daughter who'd asked me why her juice box couldn't just disappear when she was done with it. Out of the mouths of babes, right? That innocent question had led me down a rabbit hole of polymer chemistry that consumed my every waking moment. I'd tested over 200 catalyst combinations, filled 6 lab notebooks with calculations, and probably consumed my body weight in coffee. But Harrison had other plans. "Diana, sweetheart," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair, "this needs someone with real academic credibility. Someone the reviewers will respect." Translation? Someone with a penis and an Ivy League diploma. The meeting happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd worn my lucky lab coat, the one with the barely visible coffee stain that looked like Einstein's profile. It was 2:30 p.m., right after lunch, when people are most vulnerable to making terrible decisions. Harrison had summoned me to his office with the enthusiasm of a man about to deliver disappointing news. His office was exactly what you'd expect from someone overcompensating for intellectual insecurity. Mahogany, everything, leather-bound books he'd probably never read, and a Persian rug that cost more than most people's cars. The walls were covered with his academic achievements, arranged with the precision of a museum curator. His desk was immaculate, not a paper out of place, which should have been my first warning sign. People who actually work have messy desks. "Diana, I've been reviewing your proposal," he began, fingers drumming against the desk in a rhythm that reminded me of a funeral march. "The work is ... adequate, but we need someone to lead this who has the proper academic standing." I felt my stomach drop. Academic standing. Dr. Andrew Thorne will be taking point on this. MIT PhD, published extensively in Nature, exactly what the reviewers want to see. He smiled like he'd just solved world hunger. "You'll be listed as a contributor, of course." Andrew Thorne, the man who'd been at Advanced Tech for 8 months, and still couldn't operate the coffee machine without detailed instructions. The man who'd once asked me to explain the difference between polymers and monomers during a team meeting, causing an uncomfortable silence that lasted exactly 43 seconds, I counted. The man who wore lab coats and had never actually gotten them dirty, that Andrew Thorne. I'd watched him stumble through presentations, using buzzwords he'd clearly memorized without understanding their meaning. He had a habit of adjusting his glasses when he was about to say something particularly stupid, like a nervous tic that warned anyone paying attention. The other researchers had started calling him Dr. Wikipedia behind his back. But Harrison seemed oblivious to the mockery. "This is my research," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the volcanic rage building in my chest. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white. "It's company research, Diana, and companies need to present their best face to secure funding." He leaned forward, patting my hand like I was a confused child. "You understand?" I understood perfectly. I understood that 3 months of 18-hour days meant nothing. I understood that my breakthrough discovery was being gift-trapped for someone else. I understood that in Harrison's world, academic credibility meant having the right chromosomes and the right connections. I understood that merit was just a word people used when they wanted to sound fair. But what I said was, of course, Dr. Blake DeWards tasted like ash in my mouth. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of his office with the dignity of someone who hadn't just been professionally eviscerated. I made it all the way to the elevator before I started shaking. The next month was psychological warfare disguised as collaboration. Andrew Thorne pranced around the lab like he owned the place, asking elementary questions while I bit my tongue raw. He'd stand behind me while I worked, nodding sagely at processes he couldn't begin to comprehend, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal that looked more expensive than my car. "Diana, explain to me again why we used this particular catalyst," he'd ask, notebook ready, like he was conducting an interview instead of stealing my life's work. The first time he asked, I thought he was genuinely trying to understand. The 5th time, I realized he was building a script for his presentations. He'd follow me around the lab like a lost puppy, recording my explanations on his phone for reference. Then I'd watch him present my explanations to Harrison as his own insights. It was like watching someone butcher your favorite song at karaoke, except the audience was applauding. He had this annoying habit of saying "we" when describing my work. We discovered that the catalyst binding affinity increases exponentially with temperature. He'd tell visitors to the lab while I stood there fuming. "We've been working on this for months." The royal "we," apparently. But here's the thing about underestimation. It's a double-edged sword. While Andrew stumbled through my research, I was quietly preparing my own insurance policy. Every night after the lab emptied, usually around 9 p.m., I'd return to perfect my methodology, document every innovation, and prepare for the inevitable moment when competence would matter more than credentials. The security guard, an elderly man named Frank, who'd worked at Advanced Tech for 15 years, started leaving me coffee and sandwiches. "Working late again, Dr. Ramson," he'd say, keys jangling as he made his rounds. "You scientists never rest, do you?" If only he knew what I was really doing. While Andrew was at home practicing his presentation in the mirror, I was revolutionizing materials science one experiment at a time. I'd redesigned the entire synthesis process, optimized the catalyst ratios, and developed a testing protocol that would make peer reviewers weep with joy. I submitted my own paper to the Journal of Advanced Materials. Not the flashy publication Andrew preferred, but the one where real scientists publish real work. The editor, Dr. Lisa Chen, was notorious for her rigorous standards. She'd once rejected a paper because the author had used utilize instead of use in the abstract. The peer reviewers were brutal, as they should be. They questioned everything, demanded proof, pushed back against every claim. Perfect! That's exactly what I wanted. The revision process took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of 16-hour days, rewriting sections, conducting additional experiments, and defending every single data point. The reviewers wanted more controls, better statistics, clearer explanations. They wanted perfection, and I gave it to them. Meanwhile, Andrew was preparing for his grand presentation to the NSF Review Committee. He'd rehearsed my discoveries so many times that he almost sounded convincing. Almost. But there's a difference between memorizing information and understanding it. When you truly understand something, you can explain it to anyone, adapt it to new situations, answer unexpected questions. When you've just memorized it, you sound like a broken record when someone asks you to elaborate. "Diana," he'd say, "you're so valuable to this team. I really couldn't do this without your technical support." Technical support. Like I was the person who fixed the printer when it jammed. I'd smile and nod, all while planning my next move. Because here's what Andrew didn't understand about science. It's not about who presents the work. It's about who can defend it. And when the time came, I'd be ready. The proposal went out on a Friday. Harrison threw a small celebration in the conference room, complete with champagne and imported cheese that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The conference room was decorated with advanced tech banners and motivational posters about synergy and innovation. Andrew gave a speech about teamwork and innovation, never once mentioning that every innovation had come from my brain. To the future of biodegradable plastics, he toasted, raising his glass. And to the brilliant team that made this possible, I smiled, raised my glass, and said all the right things. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that in the scientific community, reputation is everything. And reputation is built on one thing: being right. 3 weeks later, my paper was accepted for publication. The reviewers' comments were glowing. They called my work groundbreaking and a paradigm shift in materials science. They cited my methodology as the gold standard for future research. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I printed out the acceptance letter and tucked it into my desk drawer, next to the rejection letter from my first job application 5 years earlier. Sometimes you need to remember where you came from, that the moment of truth arrived on a Wednesday morning. I was in the lab running spectral analysis on my latest batch of samples. When I heard the sound of expensive shoes running down the hallway, Italian leather, probably from Ferragamo's, slapping against polished linoleum in a rhythm that spoke of pure panic. Harrison burst through the lab doors like a man possessed. His perfectly styled hair disheveled, his tie askew, his face flushed with panic and confusion. He was clutching a stack of papers in one hand and his phone in the other. And for the first time in 5 years, I saw him looking genuinely rattled. "Diana," he shouted, waving the papers like they were on fire. "Why did the reviewers cite your paper?" I looked up from my microscope, taking my time to focus on his face. I'd been expecting this moment for weeks, but seeing it happen was still surreal. "I'm sorry, what paper? Don't play games with me." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "The NSF reviewers, they rejected Andrew's proposal. They said, and I quote, 'The methodology presented lacks the sophistication demonstrated in recent publication on polymer synthesis.'" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I could see the exact moment when the implications hit him. His face went through several color changes, red to pale to green, like a traffic light having a nervous breakdown. I set down my pipette, slowly, deliberately. "Oh, that paper. You published without authorization. You undermined the entire proposal." He was practically vibrating with rage, his hands shaking as he waved the rejection letter. "I published my own research," I said, standing to face him. "Research that I conducted in my own time, using my own methodology." "Your methodology? This is company research, is it?" I pulled out my lab notebook, the one I'd been meticulously maintaining for 5 years. Every page was dated, signed, and witnessed. Every experiment was documented with photographic evidence. Every conclusion was supported by data that because according to my records, I developed this process on weekends and evenings, using my own materials, following my own hypotheses. Harrison's face went pale. He knew, as I knew, that intellectual property law was a minefield. He knew that I'd been careful, deliberate, and thorough in protecting my work. He knew that I'd played by the rules while he'd been playing politics. "The reviewers want to fund me directly," I continued, my voice steady as steel. "They want to offer me a position as principal investigator on a $3.2 million grant. Apparently, I'm academic enough after all." Andrew appeared in the doorway, looking confused and slightly panicked. His perfect hair was slightly mussed, his lab coat wrinkled, and he had the expression of someone who'd just realized he'd been caught cheating on a test. "Harrison, what's going on?" I heard shouting. "Dr. Thorne?" I said, turning to face him. With a smile that could have powered the entire building, "I believe you're no longer needed on this project." The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air, while the weight of his mistake crashed down around him. Andrew looked between us, trying to piece together what had just happened, his face gradually shifting from confusion to horror as understanding dawned. "You can't do this," Harrison finally managed to say. "You have a contract, you have obligations." "I have a contract to conduct research," I replied calmly, "which I've been doing. My personal research, conducted on my own time, belongs to me. Check with legal if you'd like." The next few hours were a masterclass in corporate damage control. Harrison called emergency meetings with legal, with HR, with anyone who might be able to salvage this disaster. I watched from my lab window as black-suited lawyers hurried through the building, their briefcases full of documents that would ultimately prove I'd done nothing wrong. The legal team spent 3 hours going through my documentation, my personal lab notebook, my home computer records, my receipts for materials I'd purchased myself. Everything was clean, professional, and completely legal. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, documenting every step of my process with the precision of someone who knew they'd eventually have to defend their work. Meanwhile, word was spreading through the building. The research community is smaller than you'd think, and news travels fast. By lunchtime, everyone knew that Diana Ramsden had published a paper that had torpedoed AdvancedTech's biggest grant proposal. Some colleagues looked at me with newfound respect. Others avoided eye contact entirely. I spent the afternoon fielding calls from colleagues, from reporters, from other institutions wanting to poach me. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulations and job offers. Stanford, MIT, Berkeley universities that had never given me a second glance before were suddenly very interested in my research. The scientific community had spoken, and they'd chosen competence over credentials. Dr. Susan Wright from Stanford called personally. Diana, I've been following your work for years. We'd like to offer you a position as department head. You'd have complete autonomy over your research, unlimited funding, and the best graduate students in the country. I took notes during every call, building a file of options that grew thicker by the hour. It was intoxicating, this sudden recognition of my worth. But it was also validating in a way that felt almost too good to be true. Harrison tried one last desperate gambit. He called me into his office that evening, the same office where he'd dismissed me as not academic enough, and offered me a promotion. Department head, he said. Full autonomy over my research. A substantial raise, a corner office, company car, stock options. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've already accepted a position at Stanford. They're creating a new department around my research. His face crumpled. Diana, please. Let's discuss this reasonably. We can work something out. Think about what you're throwing away. Dr. Blake, I said, standing to leave, I am being reasonable. I'm being exactly as reasonable as you were when you stole my work and gave it to someone else. I walked out of his office and never looked back. Security escorted me to my lab to collect my personal items of few plants, some photos, and my lucky lab coat. Everything else belonged to AdvancedTech, but everything that mattered belonged to me. 8 months later, I was setting up my new lab at Stanford, surrounded by graduate students who hung on my every word not because I demanded respect, but because I'd earned it. The lab was everything I'd dreamed of. State-of-the-art equipment, unlimited funding, and colleagues who valued innovation over politics. My first day, I found a bottle of champagne on my desk with a note from the dean. Welcome to Stanford. Dr. Ramsden, we're honored to have you. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now more academic than I had ever been, simply by refusing to let others define my worth. I had tenure, a 7-figure research budget, and the respect of my peers. But more importantly, I had something Harrison had never understood, the satisfaction of work well done. The grant money followed, as did the recognition. The NSF approved my funding request within 6 weeks of process that usually takes months. Other agencies reached out with additional funding opportunities. My research was featured on the cover of 3 major journals within the first year, but success brought its own challenges. Suddenly, I was the one making decisions about other people's careers. I was the one reviewing grant proposals and deciding who deserved funding. I was the one young researchers looked up to, hoping for guidance and opportunity. I thought about Harrison often in those first months. Not with anger, but with a kind of sad understanding. He'd been so focused on maintaining his position that he'd forgotten why he'd gotten into science in the first place. He'd become a gatekeeper instead of a pioneer, a politician instead of a researcher. Harrison sent me a congratulatory email when my research made the cover of Nature. The subject line read, "Congratulations on your success." I deleted it without reading past the subject line. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Andrew Thorne left AdvancedTech 2 weeks after I did. Last I heard, he was working at a small consulting firm in Nebraska, far away from any lab that might expose his limitations. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. If anything, I felt sorry for him. He'd been a pawn in Harrison's game, just as I had been. The real victory wasn't in their failure. But in my success, I'd proven that merit matters, that good work speaks for itself, and that sometimes the best response to dismissal is undeniable excellence. So here's my question for you. How many brilliant minds are sitting in labs right now, being told they're Not good enough by people who couldn't replicate their work if their careers depended on it. How many breakthroughs are being suppressed because someone decided that credentials matter more than capability? The statistics are sobering. Women in STEM fields are 40% more likely to be interrupted during presentations, 60% more likely to have their ideas attributed to male colleagues, and significantly less likely to receive funding for their research. These aren't just numbers, they're dreams deferred, innovations delayed, and human potential wasted. But here's what I've learned. Excellence is the ultimate equalizer. When your work is undeniably good, when your results speak for themselves, when your methods become the gold standard, that's when the gatekeepers lose their power. The next time someone tells you that you're not academic enough, not experienced enough, not whatever enough, remember this story. Remember that excellence speaks for itself, but only if you're brave enough to let it. Remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply being undeniably right. Document everything. Protect your work, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter, because they do. They matter more than you know. The future of science depends on people like you, people who refuse to accept that mediocrity deserves recognition simply because it comes with the right pedigree. Keep pushing boundaries. Keep proving doubters wrong. Keep believing that merit matters, even when the system suggests otherwise. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've got your own tale of workplace justice, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And remember, your work belongs to you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and proving doubters wrong.